Hello and welcome. I hope you'll join me on my trip down memory lane today as I reminisce about the books that marked my childhood. Tea goes great with nostalgia, so grab yours if you'd like and let's chat. This video is my contribution to the My Childhood Books project started by Paul at The Accidental Bookseller. If you have not checked out his channel, please do so. I have linked it down below. And thank you so much, Paul, for tagging me in this one. I've decided to cover 3 distinct stages of my childhood reading, the first of which I'm calling the pre-literate stage. So the first book that I remember my parents reading to me was La Dama y el Vagabundo. It was a Spanish version of Lady and the Tramp, and it was basically just a picture book based on the Disney version of that story. And I had memorized the text that was on each page based on the pictures that were on it because they'd read it to me so much. And I remember that they used to sit me on the couch when there were guests over and stuff and have me like read the book to them and pretend that I was some kind of like gifted genius. I didn't understand the joke at the time, but in retrospect, obviously I do. And I don't think that they have any recollection of this, but it's just like one of my earliest memories. I remember that very vividly. I also remember some Dr. Seuss from this stage, specifically The Cat in the Hat, but I know that my parents never read that to me, so it must have been like at a friend's house or in pre-K or something like that it was read to us. But I just remember really loving like the rhythm of it. The other book that my parents definitely did at some point read to me from is one that I actually still have and that is very treasured to me. I'm going to grab it, but I don't want a repeat of my coffee accident from a previous video, so I'm going to be very careful about putting everything down. Give me a sec. Don't want this to fall. Okay, so it's La Edad de Oro by José Martí. José Martí, this guy right here, was a Cuban born in 1853. He was a poet, an essayist, a translator, a journalist, a professor, like the list goes on and on. He was, very much a Renaissance man. And he was also a really important political figure for the country. He was a political philosopher who advocated for liberalism, democracy, social justice, the abolition of slavery, and very specifically Cuban independence from Spain. And in fact, he died in the Battle of Dos Rios fighting for just that. Needless to say, he's a national hero. There's like not a Cuban alive who doesn't know his name. Among his works, he published 4 volumes of a children's magazine called La Edad de Oro, the Golden Age is what it translates to. And this is kind of like a rite of passage for all Cuban children. My parents, even though we were born in the States, wanted to ensure that we had a copy of it as well and introduced us to the same stories and poems that they grew up with as kids. To this day, whenever there's a baby born in the family, my first gift idea is a copy of La Edad de Oro. This includes quite a few different types of tales, including a summary of the Iliad for children. This book is very fragile at this point. Oh, there's a little dedication here. Para mis primitos, Melissa y Daniel. The one I most remember, though, is a lengthy poem that my mom has known by heart since she was a little kid. And most Cuban children know that poem pretty intimately. It's called Los Zapaticos de Rosa, meaning the little pink shoes. And let me just really quickly show you that page. This is the first page of Los Zapaticos de Rosa, and it's about 2.5, 3 pages long here in this edition. I'll read just the first couple verses here. Even if you don't understand Spanish, you get a sense of the sound, the rhyme, the rhythm of it. Hay sol bueno y mar de espuma y arena fina, y Pilar quiere salir a estrenar su sombrerito de pluma. Vaya la niña divina, dice el padre, y le da un beso. Vaya mi pájaro preso a buscarme arena fina. It almost feels like a song to me because I heard it so many times growing up. The basic premise is that this little girl, Pilar, has 2 loving parents and a brand new pair of really pretty little pink shoes. And it's a beautiful day. Her mom is going to be taking her to the beach and she's going to be wearing her little pink shoes for the first time. So her mom is like, whatever you do, just don't mess up your little shoes. I don't want you to wet them or scoff them or damage them in any way. And she's like, fine. So they get to the beach and then she's playing, but really she wants to be playing a little bit further down over there where there's more kids. it also just so happens to be where the more impoverished people are hanging out. And she like begs her mom, please, please let me play over there. Like, you'll be able to see me. It's fine. And she's like, okay, sure, you can go over there, but just don't damage the little shoes. And she's like, okay. So she goes over there, and sometime later she comes back, head held low, no shoes on. And so her mom is like, what happened to the little pink shoes? And Pilar says nothing, but there's a lady who comes up behind her holding her daughter. And she's like, ma'am, I have the shoes. So I have a sick daughter, and I brought her here in the hopes that she would feel a little bit better, that I might get her to fall asleep. And Pilar noticed that she had no shoes, that her feet were cold, and she just offered her shoes to her and said, don't worry, take mine, I have plenty at home. And so ultimately, like, the mother learns a lesson from her daughter there. She immediately feels shame and says to the woman, oh no, please keep the shoes and take the scarf and take this ring, and here's a flower and here's a kiss. And, then she goes off back home in her car that this other lady does not have, or her carriage, I suppose, and makes it home with her shoeless daughter and kind of a new perspective on the injustice of life. And it's a poem about, basic humanity. All right, moving on to elementary school, when I actually learned to read. Most of the books that I came across in kindergarten through 5th grade were thanks to visits to the library, these little field trips that my mom and my best friend's mom would take us on. So I didn't ever own any of these books. They weren't in my house for very long. So I have a really jumbled memory of what I read at that time. But I do specifically recall that any book that had to do with like animals or nature for children, I was always drawn to at the library. So I read a lot of those. I feel like I mostly read those while actually in the library and then just left them there. I also remember the Goosebumps series, the Babysitter's Club series, and the Madeline series. That one's for like very little kids, but I later had to teach one of the Madeline books to small children, which is why I actually do now have a copy of one of them. This one is called Madeline Rescue. And it just brought back a lot of memories to actually have to teach this. There's a specific line here that I used to love doing with the kids because they got really into it. Here, it's when Madeline is up on her chair in the classroom, and it says, Madeline jumped on a chair. Lord Cuckoo Face, she cried, beware, Miss Genevieve, noblest dog in France. You shall have your vengeance. And I used to make them repeat that after me as if they were Madeline, and they would just get so passionate about it. So this is a fun one to actually get to own now as an adult. I don't remember when I picked up The Little Prince, but it was probably around when I was 10 years old because my dad had recommended it. I must have picked it up at the school library or at the local library, but I later bought copies when I was older, and I have a copy in English and a copy in French as well. I believe I also have a copy in my bookshelf that's like a larger, highly illustrated copy. But what I most recall is just how imaginative this was. I really should give this a reread. It's such a beautiful little book. But I was especially taken right away by these little drawings, and that the narrator explains how he tried to tell adults or ask adults, like, what is this a picture of? If you could see that right there. And then they would always say it was a hat. And then he's like, God, why don't adults get it? He's like, no, it's a boa constrictor who ate an elephant. So that threw me right into the story, and I just think it's so imaginative. So this was one that had quite an effect on me when I was little. Many of the other classics of children's literature I experienced first as like a movie or an animated film or something like that, and then read them later on past childhood. And that would include things like The Hobbit, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was probably like in my teen years. And even something like Charlotte's Web. I saw a cartoon version of Charlotte's Web growing up and read that book as an adult, basically. So I did still kind of experience those stories, but did not read those stories growing up. My middle school years definitely marked a shift in my reading. I think that age range between like 11 and 13 is such an interesting liminal time when you're kind of just stepping into adolescence and you have all these really complicated like thoughts and feelings. And I think that my reading, both at school and on my own, reflected that, in the sense that the overall tone and content of my reading, while still age appropriate, was in some ways like darker and heavier. Some books that I remember reading in school were Old Yeller by Fred Gibson. This is the one where the little boy has his dog, and I won't go into it if you haven't read it, but it's really sad and depressing by the end. But that one was like a really tough read for a sixth grader. And then I also have a very vivid recollection in the seventh grade of reading The Telltale Heart in class. It was either Halloween or it was like very close to Halloween, and the teacher had us all sit on the floor. She turned the lights out and put some candlelight on, and we sat in a circle, and she read us Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, like very dramatically. And that had an effect on me. I was like, wow, this stuff is awesome. There was also Summer of My German Soldier by Bette Green, which I should really reread that book. I don't know what happened to my copy of it, but I wonder what it would feel like as an adult, because there was a young girl, American, Jewish American, and an escaped prisoner of war from Germany, so a Nazi, and she hides him out in her backyard in her treehouse, basically. So it's a really interesting story. I would be really curious to see how that would feel to me now, but I remember that everybody in the class was like really into that book at the time. I also don't know what happened to my copy of The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, but that was the first book that upon reading it, I thought to myself, this is my favorite book. So I hadn't really ever had a favorite book up until that point. I believe that like from that point forward is when I started seeing myself as a reader, like when that became kind of part of my identity. I do still own my copy of a book called Izzy Willy Nilly. Let me pull that one out. So this did not turn out to be the classic that The Outsiders was, but this is what the paperback looks like. It's by Cynthia Voigt. And it was basically like a cautionary tale. I don't remember the plot very much, but I do remember that it was about a young girl who goes out with a boy, and then he drinks too much and drives her home. They have an accident, and then she is severely injured and her life is forever changed. The Boston Globe back here says, give this book to every teenager you know who has a driver's license. It's a riveting story about driving drunk and the devastating consequences it can wreak. So once again, a cautionary tale, which, you know, was given to us to read for obvious reasons, even though none of us had a driver's license, you know, in middle school. Books that I read on my own included Anne of Green Gables. I had already seen the series that was popular at the time on TV, but I had not read the book. So I did know the story. I was familiar at least with the first part of the Anne of Green Gables story, and then I came around to reading the book somewhere in middle school. This wasn't the copy that I owned back then or that I checked out at the library. I can't even recall, but this is a copy that I've since purchased because it is one of my favorites. Then there's The Pigman, which look at how beat up this copy is of this little paperback. This is by Paul Zindel. I literally remember none of the plot, but I remember it being engrossing. I can read the little description in the back. It's very short. Meet Mr. Pignotti, a lonely old man with a beer belly and an awful secret. He's the pig man, and he's got a great big twinkling smile. When John and Lorraine, two high school sophomores, meet Mr. Pignotti, they learn his whole sad, zany story. They tell it right here in this book, the truth and nothing but the truth, no matter how many people it shocks or hurts. And once again, I don't remember the plot. I just remember that it was kind of like a mystery that they were trying to solve, and that there were some fun little images or diagrams. Like here, this helped me. And there was like this little map, I think. Oh, here we go. So this very like crudely drawn something or other. I guess they're trying to figure something out, but it would be really fun to reread this actually. I think I'm gonna leave these outside the bookshelf so I can give them a shot. I mean, that should take me a couple hours to get through probably. And then the last book that I still own from this period is called Eva. This is by Peter Dickinson. I do not remember where I got this book, maybe at one of those Scholastic book fairs, but I picked this up on my own. I had never heard of it before, and I remember it being pretty wild, like the basic premise. It was kind of my first foray into sci-fi, if you will, because the basic premise is that this girl has some kind of like fatal accident or almost fatal accident, and she's in a coma, and then she wakes up and something is weird, and it turns out that it's weird because her dad made it so that her brain could be implanted in like a chimp, in a monkey of some kind. It was the only way that she could survive. And so now she's a monkey, or she's like in the body of a monkey with her consciousness of a human. That's all I remember. Like, that's the starting premise. But I really should reread this as well. I'm really curious to see what I would think. Here's a description for it. 13-year-old Eva wakes up in the hospital, unable to remember anything since the picnic on the beach. Her mother leans over the bed and begins to explain a traffic accident, a long coma. But there is something Eva senses she is not being told. Some other price she must pay to be alive at all. What have they done with their amazing medical techniques to save her? Yeah, I need to reread this one. As a high school student, I started to take my reading much more seriously. So even though it was still a pleasure, I wasn't really reading in the way that I did before, because now I was employing these different like analytical frameworks, which made my reading practice feel much more adult. And that's why I'm not really classifying my high school reads into my childhood reads, even though, of course, I was by no means an adult at that stage. In any case, books definitely opened up whole worlds to me as a child. They nurtured my imagination and they introduced me to the power of storytelling and the beauty of language. I'd love to know if you guys have any especially vivid memories of childhood reading, whether it be something that you read or that was read to you as a child. Please join the conversation below. Thank you once again to Paul for tagging me in this, and thank you guys so much for joining me. Bye-bye.